Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives, episode 127. Today, Hi-Fi and I are interviewing our good friend, geopolitical analyst Monique Camarra, and we're going to be talking about why Europe stands alone. Please have a listen. Welcome back to RadPod, Monique Camarra. I'm so happy to see you. Monique is one of the most frequent guests we have on this show because whenever we feel there's just a sense of emergency and we need to know what's happening in Europe and how what's going on in America is affecting people in Europe and in the EU, we turn to Monique. And obviously, Hi-Fi and I were talking about what the theme would be for this particular episode, and Hi-Fi came up with Europe Stands Alone. And
Yeah.
Monique, wherever you want to start with that, because as we all know, Trump is working very hard to actually save Russia, as our friend Yoni Ascola tweeted out earlier today. And I picked up on that theme and ran with it because it should be so clear to everybody. He's not hiding anything. He's clearly doing Putin's bidding on every front. Clearly Musk is, clearly the entire regime is. And that goes back to what our thesis is today about Europe standing alone in this fight against, fascism, authoritarianism, call it what you want. So Monique, pick that up wherever you feel, is most urgent.
Yeah, I think I'd like to go back to a few days ago in Riyadh, because that's an important, that meeting between American and Russian authorities, we know who they are. I believe that was the moment that's when it hit me. And I saw them all in the room and they're talking and the photographs and everything looks like lovely. And that hit me and I said, okay, basically now Russia's isolation has been broken. This is going to be a completely different setup, all right, internationally as we go forward. So this is the part, okay, that really, really struck, all right, at that time. And we know now, for example, some things are coming out of that meeting. For example, well, let's just put it this way. I had said, well, I don't think they're going to be talking too much about Ukraine, but I think this is more about business. And in fact, they threw out, for example, the Russians began talking about cooperation that they could do, right? American businesses who before, especially energy, we're talking about ExxonMobil, we're talking about Halliburton, we're also talking about Schlumberger, okay, and Baker Hughes that had to leave, okay, Russia, have lost business. So this is sort of what they're dangling, in front of the Americans, so that these businesses, right, can regain, okay, a footing in Russia. So there was that. They also dangled in front of them cooperation in the Arctic, okay, as well. And we know that recently, I'm sure you guys talked about it with Greenland and no other areas as well. So this is, I think, much more important, these kind of things that were going on than what they were talking about Ukraine. What came out of that, for example, was a three-part plan, all right, for so-called, all right, peace. We know that he's gunning for some sort of international recognition, so on and so forth, but it was supposed to be like ceasefire, and then now they're pressing elections in Ukraine, and then some sort of peace deal would magically appear, okay? And we see that this is the kind of stuff that they're pushing, okay, constantly on social media, the kind of narratives. Now, what we also found out today, that the Russians, what Putin is demanding is that the United States leave Europe, okay, take away all of its troops, and they want to go back to the 1990, okay, setup that was there when, right, we know when communism fell, when the Soviet Union fell. So what we're talking about, really, if you come to think of it, they want, okay, countries that were in NATO at that time, that got into NATO after that. So we're talking about Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Slovenia, Poland, Hungary, and Czechia. Okay, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about just, okay, we'll keep Zaporizhia, Okay, we're not talking about that anymore. They've gone maximalist. They've gone into, let's say, a territory where it's going to be extremely difficult. All right. And if Trump thinks that, I mean, my honest feeling is that this is sort of all just show. And, you know, what we're seeing and what is the most disturbing thing, and that's what depressed me today, was that for years, up until this moment, after, let's say, the Second World War, Cold War, we're talking about the United States being a guarantor, all right, of an international order that was rules-based. And now we're seeing that they have changed completely. The Trump administration has changed its foreign policy to such a degree that we don't recognize it anymore. That's what, okay, is really, truly, truly disturbing.
Yeah.
And it's like they're going to be, what, they're shacking up now with Russia. They're shacking, they're trying, you know, it's that old mentality that you remember in the 1970s, right, with Nixon, right, trying to divide the two. Okay, we're back to that. Actually, we're going back now, and you guys see it as well. We're going back to a kind of diplomacy, let's call it diplomacy, where it's force, the use of force, 19th century stuff. Okay, we're talking Bismarck, we're talking realpolitik, right? We're talking about the Macandar heartland theory and the Eurasia theory, and we're talking about manifest destiny. This is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's going back to an age that we thought we had already, okay, put a cap on. The one other thing that really bothered me throughout this whole thing is there was really no sense. It's like a foreign policy that is completely devoid of morals and any kind of values, things that we used to believe. This is the part that depressed me today the most, was that there wasn't one mention of the kind of values that, okay, they did it maybe in a good way, bad way, whatever, but at the base of intellectual American thought has always been either Christian or lay philosophy that had a certain value system to it. This is something that is just dog eat dog, power hungry. Let's, you know, and that's what I'm seeing. That's the part that really, truly disturbs me. Can you imagine what the diplomats are going to be going through? Like the kind of relations, okay, it's all transactional. You give me this, give me some critical minerals, because that's what I'm, you know, looking for. That's what Trump is looking for, right? Critical minerals. That helps Musk as well. We know that. So, you know, that's the kind of thing. That's where I wanted to start in Riyadh.
Thank you so much, Monique. That was such important framing, and that's exactly where we needed to start. And today I wrote about how we all of us have to work hard to restore our humanity if we want to figure out a way to save whatever we can from this world, because they have been extracting our humanity, extracting our empathy. They've been delivering cruelty under a lie of, some sort of, belt tightening, when it's all we know, like Russia in the 90s. We know where this is going. Oligarchs running politicians, politicians as
Yeah.
puppets. We've seen this before, but what I think it's really hard for Americans to accept is that we have now cut ourselves off from Europe as we know it as our
Yeah.
ally. Just like you were saying, our military was always, part of the post World War II liberal world order alliance where we had each other's backs. That is clearly not what's going on anymore. He's clearly aligning himself with the new axis of evil. And it seems to me there's only a few countries, Poland and Finland perhaps, that are really calling it what it is. Maybe there's some more. I know Macron has, made some serious statements. And of course, we are going to be having Gabrielis Landsbergis on our show coming up, the former foreign minister of Lithuania, who really understands that information warfare has always been terrorism. It's always been war. But what is Europe doing collectively to protect themselves from this gigantic looming threat of this new axis of evil?
Yeah. Well, let's start, let's say about 18 months ago, because we're not talking look, I'd like to dispel a bit of the myth that Europe, was sort of surprised by all of this. Okay. Remember, this is the European Union that we're talking about, a collection, a union of nations that go back to ancient history. They've seen it all and they've done it all. Okay. So let's not, it's a bit naive to say, oh my God, they were surprised. No, they knew that this was coming. Now, between knowing that it's coming, accepting that now, as we've seen, okay, today, for example, if you paid attention to what Vance said, all right, and what a few others have said, okay, they're now facing the whole idea, how do we actually, what are we going to do, okay, in this situation? You have to figure out what's the goal, what's the strategy, and what are our means, because this is what we're talking about. And that's what they're working out right now. There are capabilities in the EU already. Rheinmetall, for example, already produces more shells than any American company. Okay, so this is important to understand, and they're opening more factories in Ukraine that basically at 30% of the cost of what they can do in the States. So this is happening. There are a lot of countries that are now stepping up and saying, okay, we've got to do this. We've got to increase our defense. Now, there's one thing that we also have to realize is that when they say we're going to increase our defense the way Poland did and others, most of it is for internal defense. Okay, so we're not talking about that kind of money that's given directly to the Army or to Air Force and or to the Navy, okay, to the armed forces themselves. It's for internal defense. There are very few countries in Europe that actually do, let's say, certain kinds of programs. All right, Italy, for example, I can give you one example that I know of. They are the Air Force, the Italian Air Force runs all sorts of different sorties and for protecting the skies and this kind of thing. All right, it's also got, because it's the second largest army, okay, in Europe. So it has commitments abroad. A lot of armies don't. Poland is huge, but I'm not sure exactly, I'm not up to scratch on exactly what Poland is doing outside of its borders. So I think they're going to have to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? Okay, what are our forces? There is one suggestion, the French and the British have suggested a reassurance force, which is about 30,000. That's where they're going to Washington next week, okay, to talk to Trump about. It would be a force of about 30,000 troops to be deployed in Western Ukraine. This is an old idea, by the way. This is something that has been talked about before through my own sources. I knew about this quite a while ago. And here we're talking about placing, let's say, troops or wherever they are in Western Ukraine in order, let's say, for protection. These would be for the defense of infrastructure. All right. Intelligence sharing. We're not talking about, they wouldn't be sent to Eastern Ukraine. In Eastern Ukraine, that would be, okay, let's say the armed forces that are there. This is simply also to sort of lift the burden that is totally on Ukraine right now with their own men, and to be able to deploy them in other areas, okay, in Ukraine itself. So this is something that is being put on the table. Obviously, it has to be talked about. There's also another problem as well. It's not like the United States, where you have Trump and his administration who are pretty much Article 2 gives the president, the powers in order, to enact and his foreign policy, okay, his foreign policy objectives and strategy. The EU doesn't have that because we're 27 separate nations. And we don't have that central figure. Also, you have internally, politically, von der Leyen is a centralizing force. She is very much in control, and she keeps everything very close to her chest. People outside of that circle, like Kaya Kallas, okay, who should be heading up, right? All of the foreign policy, okay, so-called foreign policy of the EU, the direction, or at least to coordinate amongst all of the other nations, she doesn't have much power right now. Okay, so this is the reality of the situation.
Wow.
So this is why you can have a Macron who steps up and says, we got to do something, okay, and calls a meeting. And that's why we saw von der Leyen, she went, okay, to Paris. She was there, all right, when he called it. So this is something that we have to realize, and it's going to take a complete change of mindset of how you do things. And the first thing, I think it was Tusk today, okay, this evening released, actually said that the first thing that has to be done is the financing, okay, for Ukraine. Let's remember, you guys are going to love this. So let's remember that the EU has given much more than the United States, right, in financing.
Yeah.
That money went for certain part of it for military in order for Ukraine to be able to buy military equipment. And a lot of it went to keeping the Ukrainian state afloat. So we're talking payments for teachers, doctors, okay, to keep everything of the infrastructure in the state going, okay? You know how Trump keeps throwing out this 300 billion? Okay, for some reason he's got this stupid number in his screwy head. That number, by the way, is the amount that was calculated on the American oil businesses. Okay, that's what they lost because of the sanctions. So that's what he's talking about. He's not talking about the money that's actually given to Ukraine. So I saw it today and I said, oh my God, that's what he's talking about. So he's actually just lobbying for the oil companies. Okay, that's what that 300 is. That's what the 300 is. So first of all, it's they want to use the Russian assets. 200 billion of those are in Europe. Okay, they want to use those Russian frozen assets. Tusk also talked about strengthening policing, air policing, and that's where Italy would come in, okay, and maybe a few other countries. Also, the Baltic Sentry. Now, this is probably going to be based on, there is already a NATO, grouping, the GEF, and they do it for the seas, okay, in order to monitor and also investigate the Russian shadow fleet. You know how they stopped, okay? Finland stopped a ship. That's part of that. And also with policing also on the EU borders. This could be, for example, using drones. They can use all sorts of different technology in order to do that, but that's something else. And another thing too, and this is really important, is that they have to begin adopting the recommendations that were in the Draghi report, okay, that I've talked about before, Heidi, and the thing. And that is essential because you need to alleviate a lot of the regulations and fiscal pressures that there are on different industries. If you don't do that, they can't produce. And this is one of the let's say one of the blocking. So what are we talking about here in essence? We're talking about in some way or another trying to guarantee as much security as possible to Ukraine and keep going with that, because the Russian economy, by the way, all right, because nobody's talking about the stupid Russian economy, all right? The Russian economy, okay, we're talking about, they are now at a point where they cannot lend any more money, all right, to their industries. That's all dried up. The money that was in the Russian National Wealth Fund, okay, has been reduced drastically. We're talking, that's the money that was spent on the war itself to finance, okay, all of the defense procurement, all right, and that's completely dwindled. And we're also talking about inflation. There is rampant inflation going on right now. And we're talking, the money supply has grown from 50 trillion rubles. So we're talking about 545 billion, okay, in 3 years. And it's now reached, up from let me get this correct. Basically, they've reached now 117 trillion rubles. Okay, that's what we're talking about. So when you have inflation in the country, when you've got this influx, okay, because they just keep printing money, that's what they're doing. So they're putting this all out there, and prices are going up, and they can't control it anymore. So people that I talk to in finance that know a lot about finance, okay, specifically, they feel that they cannot go on, let's say, within the year 2000. That's why it's important that as Europeans, we keep it going. That's why I don't understand. I mean, I don't understand. I understand what Trump is doing. But no one has said to him, hey, how about a few more heavy sanctions? Let's drop that cap, okay, that, on oil, okay, put it down under, all right, close to $40, and let's see what happens. Okay, I don't understand why anybody is not saying, okay, let's do a huge economic warfare push against Russia. It'll I'm not going to say they're going to collapse within the year, but it'll certainly do, tons of damage.
If anything, Trump has eliminated the enforcement mechanisms of sanctions against Russia. Because he works for Russia.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest, right?
Yeah. Well, they don't need, like, let's say, sanctions, right? Because all of these sanctions, what they're basically doing, what Trump has done, is taken away the enforcement mechanisms for those sanctions. So even if he doesn't drop them, it doesn't matter who's going to enforce them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's so. Hi-Fi, I know you've got a question. I just have one or two more things, Monique. Thank you so much for all your time and the preparation you put into this. It means so much to me, and to Hi-Fi. So for me, just where I'm at is that I think that we are watching everything we've known about the world politically just unravel in real time in front of our eyes. And I don't think anybody is actually taking the time to mourn it, acknowledge it, mark it. It's like we're just sort of, kind of like doing the best we can every day. But I'm in mourning. I am traveling through Europe. I am meeting the most beautiful people every day. And nobody quite knows what to say to me when I say I'm American, which I'll be writing about this because people are in fucking mourning over the fact that we are no longer friends. I mean, that's really the bottom line, unless, of course, you run into somebody who's authoritarian minded. And I don't even know if that's a question. I just feel like we're not acknowledging this horrible heaviness that we just got hit with. We just aligned with the worst of the schoolyard bullies, and I don't see a way out because we are living under what my friend Hardeep calls techno monarchy right now. Like this is, this is a new world disorder, is what I call it.
Yeah. Well, they're hitting us so hard. First of all, it's a barrage, right? I mean, you guys have seen it. So it's a barrage every single day of statements that are offensive because it's dismantling of a world order that existed. And I mean, I do realize, okay, if this is the new reality, then, we're going to have to change things. And that's just reality. But at the same time, as I said before, it was it really did hit me in the sense that this stuff that he's saying, Vance today, for example, that, he said the US, Europe is no longer, doesn't share the same values as the Americans, okay, which is absolutely absurd. Well, okay, they're pursuing he said that the Europeans are pursuing other values that are offending the sensibility of Americans, which is this is complete BS. We all know that. But it's one thing understanding, okay, but it still hurts. It's not something that, is at all
propaganda. It's power stuff. So high fidelity.
So here's my issue. I mean, obviously, Europe now stands alone. The temporarily occupied United States of America has joined the Axis powers. My concern is inside of Europe, I still see plenty of Russian snakes. Maloney aligns with the fascists. You've still got Orban in the EU. You've still got Fitzo. You've got, I mean, the list goes on, right? And their agents, the propagandists. I mean, you got Elon Musk talking about the
mega movement.
Or the mega movement. Yeah. Oh, and now he's trying to pin the death of the sex tourist journalist, Don, whatever the fuck that guy's name was.
Yeah. I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
I mean, the attacks are obvious by this point. Do you feel that Europe has the power? I mean, you've got Macron, Schultz is apparently on board with Ukraine. Why aren't weapons pouring into Ukraine? Why?
Well, they are. I mean, they're being okay. They are being sent. That kind of thing. Well, yeah, no, that's what. Okay, that's the increase. Okay, that we're talking about. These are the changes, and these are the things that have to go. Now, one thing about the political situation here, and in a certain way, our having 100 different parties kind of helps in this way, because you're going to have to get, well, think about it, right? In the United States, it was easy to co-opt because you have two parties. And in the UK, all right, they've got to be careful because, right, it's still two parties. In Europe in general, we have so many different parties that they would have to co-opt all of them, okay? And that's not easy to do. That's why, by the way, they try to co-opt the top of the leadership, okay? Anybody that they feel will be able to win an election. Now, the German election is coming up. We know that the CDU, okay, is doing very well. Merz will probably be forming the next government, but it's always going to be a coalition government. Okay, so this is something that in Europe sort of saves us, because we have so many different political expressions going from extreme right to extreme left that, they would have to co-opt all of those people. Now, what they will do is probably choose the countries that are the weakest, okay, where they can enter and penetrate. This is the mega movement, right, that we're talking about. But just so that, we understand what the kind of, let's say, the kind of politics that would, that the mega movement would have to, all right, operate in, the kind of environment that they have to operate in, which won't be that easy, by the way. Okay, it won't be that easy. Then you have a lot of jealousies between different people. I mean, it's a little different, okay, here in Europe. But getting back to what you said, Hi-Fi, of course, what the most important thing for us to do now, increase production, okay, where it's possible. I know in Italy, for example, Rheinmetall has 2, okay, factories going. Okay, those can be, okay, increased there. And there are other areas as well. I know that they're opening, okay, others. They also have to keep some for themselves. Poland. Sorry?
How soon until the Russians bomb them?
Will the Russians bomb? Okay, into
the
Europe.
Factories, yeah. They've already
where
they could sabotage more than bomb. It would be just like sabotage.
Yes, right? It's sabotage. It's provocateurs. It's where they excel is information warfare, which is why I think if a real resistance ever forms, it would be very powerful, because the fact is that information warfare is a lot of smoke and mirrors. And, I do hope that, that there is kind of a sense that people finally get out of the despair of it and into some kind of action. And what it looks like, I still don't know, because again, we have not been living under techno-fascism for that long. We are now, and we have to figure out what we're going to do about it.
Well, it's
Monique,
also,
I want to thank you so much for being here today. But the one last thing I want to say is you've been documenting Russia's war in Ukraine, their war of aggression. You've been documenting the full-scale invasion for, a decade, and really focusing every day on what's happening since the full-scale invasion. And just sort of give a sense of anything you're learning from your Ukrainian sources on how they are adjusting to this election and this alliance and the lies that, I called Zarina this morning because I was so devastated when I heard Trump telling the same lies that you would get, the same exact lies you would get on Russian state TV was coming out of the so-called president of the United States mouth. And I was just, it's hard not to get winded over something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that I mean, I'm in some private chats and that kind of thing. So it's not like I have a huge like following. There are some specific people that I talk to.
Yeah.
I think that there were a lot of Ukrainians who felt that Trump would be able to shake things up. They felt that Biden was not doing enough.
Yeah.
And they were kind of hoping, okay, that he
Yeah.
would, let's say they tried to appeal to his narcissism and his
Yes.
and his feeling that maybe he wants to win, right, over Putin. Olga, my partner, right, on Kremlin File, and she just, I remember we were talking about that. She said no. She said absolutely not. They're deluding themselves if they think that this is going to happen. He's going to actually help Russia. And in fact, I remember talking to even some of my students, and I said, no, I mean, the worst possible thing that could happen is that he gets elected, because he will help Russia. He will rehabilitate them. He will bring them back into the international fold, and he'll make it look like it's Ukraine's fault and it's the EU's fault. I remember saying this, sort of like, when you have you're attracted to a new girlfriend, all right, or a new boyfriend, okay, but you got to get rid of the old one. So what do? You shit on the old one, okay, so that they end up leaving you, because this is the feeling that I'm getting, okay, that he's coming out with these things that are like, okay, all right, a little overkill here. Getting back to the Ukrainians, well, on the ground, from what my understanding is that things are going slightly better, okay, than they were before, but they're running out of ammunition. The United States has not sent everything that it had promised. So basically, the Europeans have to make that up. Okay, and that's what is ongoing now. Yeah. So, and at a time, they're doing better. Let's just put it that way. At a time when Russia, all we have to do is apply even more economic pressure, right? And it could turn, okay, quite quick. That's why for me, it's sort of like, okay, this was an easy thing, right, for Trump. But no, obviously, we're deluding ourselves if we think that this is the thing. All right, he's got too many people that he has to pay back. Russia, we're also talking about the Saudis. Okay, it's it's no
fossil fuel
secret that it's no secret that this meeting happened in Riyadh. Okay, so it's not like it happened in Turkey, for example, or someplace else. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. So I can only hope and pray that Europe really does, at this point, now that they have the entity, okay, of what we're talking about. Because it's one thing saying Trump is going to pull away from Europe. It's another thing when he starts actually doing it, and you have to deal with that, okay, and set out a goal. What is your goal? To keep Ukraine alive. Okay, what's the strategy to do that? And what are our means to do that? Because it's a whole process of planning that has to be done quite quickly, right? Again, it's not like we have the armed forces of Europe. It's a coordination that has to be done amongst all nations. And a lot of them are saying, well, we're trying to protect this. We're already overextended. Italy, for example, is extended in many parts of the world. So, it's going to have to let go maybe of some missions and come back to Europe. That kind of thing. So this is what's happening now.
Wow. Thank you so much for that update. I'm so grateful to you. We're going to try to get this up and out as quickly as possible. Hi-Fi, any final word?
I just hope Europe realizes really what they're up against now.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Good.
I mean, I've talked to people at defense level, and they had already figured all of this out about 18 months ago.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Now, the whole problem is you've got to get people who are defense-minded, okay, integrated with the political, right?
Yeah.
Because this is another problem that we have. Elections are coming up. Then, politicians, they're thinking of a very short life cycle, right, for ideas. They're thinking more domestic politics as opposed to foreign policy. they're trying to get elected in their right, in their constituencies. So to them, this is a big problem. I can only hope that maybe Congress, okay, the people that are, let's say, on the bipartisan, because Ukraine is a bipartisan issue. It's not something, okay, that is partisan. It's bipartisan. I can only hope that they will also step up to mitigate some of the worst parts of what Trump is trying to do. That's I saw a few tweets today. I don't know whether that will materialize or not, but it was good to see at least that they're talking about it. It was like, where's Congress?
I know.
Where the F are they? Think about it.
They're
right?
voting on Kash Patel to be head of the FBI.
So the way I look at it, again, being in the travel through Europe a bit right now, is that where we lost in America is that nobody was willing on the pro-democracy front to fight the information war and to expose what needed to be exposed. They were worried about other things, and they should have turned their attention to what really, really was happening, because that's how we ended up losing our democracy at this time. It seems that, there's very little argument that they're turning America into an authoritarian structure. And so I just hope European leadership, and I hear it in Poland and I hear it in Finland, they're very aware that there's an information war. They know Russia. They don't believe their lies, and they're inoculating their citizens. And I hope that that catches through Europe, because they must look toward America and determine what they want to be. And I don't think they want to be like what we've become. And that is my prayer. So once again, we feel like Europe stands alone in this, but we are with Europe and all of our allies and all the new friends I'm personally making, in the hopes that we don't see Elon Musk's outsized influence and his money being able to tilt elections toward a fascist outcome. So Europe at least has seen this before. Be aware of the reality. Monique Camarra, thank you so much for being with us here today. Hi-Fi, as always, thank you for producing, and we look so forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
thank you.
better days.
Thanks.